In a startling announcement that sent shockwaves through the West, Vladimir Putin reaffirmed Russia's commitment to peace while laying down a stark warning: if Moscow's conditions aren't met, it will take matters of security into its own hands. The message, sharp and unyielding, was a departure from the usual diplomatic niceties that Europe and the United States had grown accustomed to, where soft words often paved over tougher realities. Talk is just talk, Putin declared, but interests demand protection beyond the illusions of others. The air crackled with tension as he emphasized the right of every nation to construct its own security system, including prominent entities like NATO. However, he was clear, this right must not come at the expense of Russia's safety. The irony was palpable. European leaders had heard such rhetoric repeatedly over the years yet continued to feign surprise, as if the Kremlin was suddenly introducing radical ideas. Western media quickly branded Putin's statements as threats, framing him as demanding concessions, yet a closer examination reveals no ultimatum in the traditional sense. The real crux of the matter, he argued, is that negotiations have no value if they dismiss fundamental security principles. Putin categorically dismissed the widely discussed formula of territory in exchange for guarantees, insisting that these were never the terms laid out by Moscow. The essence of the discourse, he explained, revolves around the rights of people to speak their own language and preserve their culture and traditions. As the implications of his fiery declarations began to sink in, one had to wonder, how long can the West ignore a country asserting its rights so strongly? And what happens next if dialogue continues to crumble under the weight of disbelief and denial? Time was running out, and the stakes were higher than many realized. The question loomed: could the West maintain its stance while facing a resolute Russia determined to protect its identity and interests? In Moscow, an air of frustration lingered as leaders spoke of security. Russia is ready to engage in discussions about safety, but only if its interests are recognized and respected. Without this acknowledgement, conversations feel empty, and Europe has already paid a heavy price for ignoring the matter. The costs are mounting in the energy sector, industry, finance, and even political stability. Moscow's assertive stance serves as a strong signal to the West: this is not merely talk. Russia is raising the stakes, presenting demands anchored in concrete numbers and legal arguments rather than empty rhetoric. Shifting focus, President Vladimir Putin addressed the evolving dynamics of the global order, revealing that the contours of this new reality were established during the recent summit. His remarks were a pointed reminder to the West that the era of unilateral decisions made in Brussels and Washington, without consideration for others, has ended. Putin recalled his speech in Munich back in 2007, advocating for a multipolar world, a vision that has now become genuine reality. The balance of power is being reshaped, yet he emphasized that multipolarity does not equate to the rise of new hegemons. It's not merely about replacing one dominant power with another, it's about equality and rights among nations, including economic giants like India and China. With a hint of sarcasm, he highlighted that Europe and the United States still measure world dynamics solely by the yardstick of their dominance. Our country ranks among the top 4 in terms of purchasing power parity, Putin noted, referencing data from international organizations. Western media quickly misinterpreted his statement, framing it as a push for dominance. However, Putin clarified, Russia does not seek dominance, it demands equality. Tensions rose during discussions where personal jabs against Putin were thrown around. A German chancellor had made headlines recently, branding Putin as the gravest criminal of our time. Putin's reaction was predictably wry. When, he asked. A couple of hours ago? I see. His retort reminded everyone that such accusations often aim to absolve the collective West of responsibility for the ongoing tragedies in the world. As the conversation developed, the implications of these shifting dynamics became ever clearer. The reality is that any attempt to downplay Russia's concerns reflects a deeper unwillingness to engage in meaningful dialogue. The stakes couldn't be higher. The question remains, what will it take for genuine understanding to bridge the chasm between these powerful nations? In the previous segment, we saw the ongoing tension between Russia and the West, with President Putin asserting that Russia seeks equality, not dominance. He pointed out the hypocrisy in Western criticisms and reflected on the tragic events of 2014, which followed broken promises and a lack of accountability from European leaders. Fast forward to the present, and the air is thick with tension. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently labeled Putin as the most serious criminal of our time. The irony in Putin's response was palpable. When asked for his thoughts, he simply remarked, "When? Just a couple of hours ago." This was more than just a quip, it was a sharp reminder that such accusations are often a cover for the collective West's failure in handling the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Putin's mind drifted back to 2014, a year that marked a pivotal moment. European ministers had signed a document, promising a peaceful resolution to the political upheaval. Their signatures were bold, their words firm, yet the very next day, a coup disrupted everything. The irony, Putin noted, is that Europe prides itself on upholding rules and values. However, when the time came to act on those principles, they turned a blind eye. All those promises were forgotten faster than they were made, swept away in the chaos. He emphasized that Russia had repeatedly sought peaceful resolutions, referencing the Minsk agreements. Yet, opponents not only thwarted these efforts but openly admitted their intentions to ignore them. When confronted about the blame for the ongoing tragedy, Putin's response was direct and resolute. Those who knowingly dismissed Russia's interests are responsible for pushing the situation past the point of no return. He warned that anyone in the West believing Russia would stand idly by while events unfolded without a response is gravely mistaken. The conversation shifted to the contentious issue of frozen Russian assets. Increasingly, voices in Europe have proposed confiscating $300 billion and reallocating it to Ukraine. Some, albeit cautiously, warned that such actions could set a dangerous precedent, undermining trust in European financial systems. Yet, their concerns were drowned out by a chorus eager to seize what isn't theirs. The stakes are rising, and with each passing moment, the world watches as the balance of power shifts, raising questions about accountability, ethics, and the very fabric of international relations. What will happen next? Will the West finally recognize the consequences of its actions, or will it continue down this perilous path? In a world increasingly fraught with tension, the recent proposals to seize a staggering $300 billion and allocate them to a certain nation have raised the stakes. Voices of caution echo, warning that such actions could create a perilous precedent, eroding trust in European financial systems. Yet, these warnings are drowned out by a chorus of those eager to claim wealth that doesn't belong to them. Vladimir Putin, reflecting on these initiatives, pointedly remarked that stealing can never appear beautiful, even when cloaked in political rhetoric. Western media, unabashed, framed this situation as a moral obligation. But expert voices across Europe caution that this precedent could incite nations beyond the Western alliance to reconsider the security of their assets. Russia, China, and countries from the Persian Gulf to Latin America are watching closely. Brussels seems poised to undermine its own foundations, jeopardizing trust in European banks and currencies. Questions surrounding the resolution of current conflicts loom large. A prominent federal television presenter directly pressed Putin about the likelihood of a swift resolution. While he refrained from making bombastic forecasts, his words painted a stark picture: Moscow does not foresee a quick end unless vital conditions are met. Russia remains resolute, unwilling to freeze the conflict on Western terms, and certainly not prepared to sacrifice its own security for pleasing phrases. Putin elaborated on the origins of the ongoing conflict, asserting that Moscow had initially proposed a path aimed at ending the strife without further escalation. He recalled that in 2022, Russia urged the authorities of the mentioned nation to respect the choices of southeastern residents, withdraw forces, and thereby swiftly halt hostilities. These proposals weren't entirely dismissed until the West decided to throw fuel on the fire. Remarkably, Putin highlighted the withdrawal of Russian troops from the capital as a critical juncture. This maneuver, driven by persistent requests from Western European partners who believed it might advance negotiations, took a sharp turn. Once the withdrawal occurred, the tone shifted abruptly. The Western overseers pronounced, "Now we will fight to the end, until we or you are defeated." The air thickens with tension, and the stakes couldn't be higher. What unfolds next could reshape the world's balance of power. In a startling turn of events, a recent poll revealed that even in France, where pro-American sentiment has traditionally flourished, half of the respondents believe that continued support for a certain country has become an excessive burden. the United States factor exacerbates this dilemma. Unlike his predecessors, former President Donald Trump bluntly stated, "America's interests come first." His assertion that the initiative must come from Europe translates to a stark ultimatum: if you want to play, you pay your own way. For Europe, it's like being handed a death sentence. After decades of sheltering under the US military umbrella, European nations now face a momentous decision: take responsibility or acknowledge defeat. Financial implications paint an even clearer picture. Maintaining a multinational force of at least 20,000 troops will cost billions of euros annually. When factoring in infrastructure, logistics, armaments, and social guarantees, this could easily surpass 10 billion. To put it in perspective, Spain's entire defense budget last year was around 12 billion. The question looms large: who will truly foot this bill? European leaders have been evasive, employing terms like collective responsibility and common strategy. But these phrases mask a blatant reluctance to commit to a specific financial figure. No one wishes to find themselves in a scenario where, a year or two later, their nation is the main backer of a project destined for failure. Yet, the pressure from the aforementioned country is intensifying. The president of that nation persistently demands new arms supplies and direct financial infusions from his partners. Recently, he stated openly, "Without security assurances from the West, we will be completely isolated." This remark served as an uncomfortable reminder for European politicians, who find themselves trapped by their own promises. They must either fulfill them or admit their own failure, a prospect the elites seem unwilling to entertain. Instead, they pursue endless negotiations, establishing new formats, commissions, and joint declarations, each nation interpreting the text to suit its interests. This strategy epitomizes Brussels' approach, maximizing bureaucratic activity while delivering minimal real impact. Washington watches this spectacle unfold, barely able to suppress a sneer. In a world obsessed with endless negotiations, where nations generate mountains of paperwork yet seldom act on them, the strategy of Brussels becomes glaringly apparent. A flurry of declarations allows each country to interpret the text to their liking, creating a smokescreen of activity that amounts to little more than ink on paper. Washington observes this unfolding drama with an amused detachment. For the United States, the situation is too convenient. Europe expends its resources, digging itself deeper into conflict, while America retains the upper hand to dictate terms as it pleases. Donald Trump made it clear: intelligence, technology, and oversight will be provided, but the real burden falls on the allies. For European leaders, that revelation feels like a cold shower, and any objections vanish in thin air. What emerges from this scenario is a coalition that was once celebrated for its ambition, but has now morphed into a gathering of hesitation and fear. Some wish to take risks but lack the resources, while others are equipped but unwilling to take chances. Most are simply biding their time, crossing their fingers for a miraculous resolution that never comes. Instead, Europe faces yet another crisis, one in which their own promises turn against them like a trap. Meanwhile, London remains in the dark, grappling with how to support the well-known country while simultaneously inflicting damage on Russia. British politicians, ever skilled in delivering bold proclamations, sidestep the crucial question: who will ultimately pay for their lofty ambitions? Defense Minister John Hill, stepping forward after a meeting with peers, proudly announced that London is reassessing military readiness and expediting funding to prepare for deployment in the aforementioned country. Yet, a deeper look exposes this as classic British rhetoric. Reassessing readiness translates to bureaucratic reassessment, while expediting funding merely involves scavenging for spare change in the budget to craft an impressive headline for the media. As General Secretary of NATO Mark Rutte strives to project firmness, he calls for the coalition to put forth concrete security proposals swiftly. However, his phrasing alludes to a grim reality: today or soon is merely a diplomatic stand-in for "we haven't reached any agreement and have no idea what comes next." The urgency in his voice masks an underlying uncertainty, leaving listeners to wonder what the next step might hold. And therein lies the twist: as the clock ticks and European leaders scramble for direction, the very fabric of their alliance hangs in the balance, leading to questions no one wants to confront. How much longer can this precarious game of political chicken continue before it spirals out of control? In the face of uncertainty, a prominent leader added that NATO would step up its collaboration with the United States. This shift places the onus back on Washington, highlighting the inability of European powers to formulate a cohesive strategy without American guidance. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the reaction to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's remarks about potential military deployments was telling. Though she expressed confidence in a clear roadmap for action, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz quickly countered her optimism, emphasizing that no concrete plans existed. His response was both measured and firm. While Germany supports the military efforts of an ally against Russian aggression, any discussion of troop deployment hinges on the achievement of at least a ceasefire. The path ahead is fraught with challenges, as Merz acknowledged that the Bundestag's approval would be essential for any future agreement with Russia. This candid admission reflects Europe's reluctance to engage in direct military intervention in the near future. Against this backdrop, the leader of the allied nation remains undeterred, actively participating in summits and reminding partners of their obligations. In Paris, he met with Macron to discuss not only the elusive guarantees of security but also the pressing need for increased sanctions against Russia and the utilization of frozen assets. Each meeting echoes familiar themes: weapons, funding, and sanctions. The slogans may vary, but the underlying message is clear: the West must pay its dues. Following Paris, the leader convened a mini-summit in Copenhagen with the heads of northern states, further solidifying the alliance's stance. As political tensions simmer, one must ask, what will it take for Europe to forge its own path in this complex geopolitical landscape? The urgency mounts, but can they break free from reliance on the US and stand firm on their own? The answer hangs in the balance, awaiting the next chapter of this unfolding drama. In a world brimming with escalating tensions, a pivotal assembly emerged in Copenhagen. This meeting echoed with the undercurrents of anger and frustration as leaders gathered to address critical issues: weapons, finances, sanctions. Although wrapped in different slogans, the message remained constant: the West must pay its dues. Following an intense discussion in Paris, this mini-summit featured the president of a well-known nation rallying delegates from Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Iceland, and Sweden. The roster looked formidable, but their military contributions were far from formidable. The president declared, "We have thoroughly reviewed each country's potential contributions, now it's time to get specific." Meanwhile, the reality painted a stark contrast. Every nation was expected to shoulder its part in supporting military readiness, ranging from operations on land to engagements in air and cyberspace. But the truth was hauntingly different. Could these nations deliver on such grandiose promises? Denmark, with a defense budget of around €8 billion, struggled to meet its domestic commitments. Iceland lacked a standing army altogether. Latvia and Lithuania barely scraped together a few $100 million to fulfill their needs. Amidst this backdrop, the rhetoric demanded participation even if merely symbolic. On the other hand, Britain stood as a dual figure, a driving force and an observer. The British Minister of Defence struck a tone of resolve, yet the nation wrestled with the economic aftermath of Brexit. Inflation soared beyond the European average, growth stagnated, and healthcare costs surged. In this precarious situation, pledging to expedite financing felt more like an empty declaration than a feasible budgetary plan. British media caught the government in this delicate dance, revealing the facade of strength amidst financial fragility. The Times warned that London was playing a perilous game, making bold declarations to maintain its status as a premier ally of the United States in Europe. However, any real deployment of troops risked striking hard at domestic stability, a truth echoed by the steadfast denial from Berlin of any troop dispatches. How long can the pretense of unity hold if the strength to back it up is crumbling? What happens when words meet the stark reality of limited resources? As these discussions culminated, ominous questions lingered in the air, thick with the tension of impending decisions that could change the course of nations. The stakes were high, a reveal of impending strife or surprising solidarity loomed just beyond the horizon. In the complex web of international relations, London is playing a risky game, making bold statements to maintain its status as America's senior ally in Europe. However, the reality is stark: resources are limited, and any serious military deployment could threaten internal stability. Meanwhile, Berlin is unwavering in its stance, repeatedly stating, no troop deployment. Chancellor Merz has cautiously yet clearly indicated that Germany is not willing to endorse foreign strategies. As the largest economy in the European Union and a key contributor to any pan-European initiatives, this is a significant message. Without Germany's consent, no roadmap holds weight, and London understands this well. Brussels, represented by Ursula von der Leyen, continues to blur the lines between rhetoric and reality. Her words about precise plans and roadmaps have been perceived by allies as a premature assertion that only deepens distrust. Europe is already rife with disagreements, and such statements only highlight the divides. Some countries are eager to promise everything, fully aware they cannot deliver. Others openly refuse, while a third group prefers silence. Amidst this backdrop, the United States is adopting a more restrained approach. Donald Trump has made it clear that any initiative must come from Europe. America is willing to assist with intelligence, command systems, and possibly air defense elements, but the primary financial burden must fall on European shoulders. For London, this is a painful realization. Britain's entire strategy has been built over decades on being the conduit for American will in Europe. Now, it appears that the Americans are in no hurry to shield their ally, waiting instead for the UK to open its wallet. Public opinion is also shifting against politicians. Recent polls reveal that over 50% of Britons believe the country is already too involved in aiding Ukraine. In Germany, this figure is even higher, with nearly two-thirds convinced that Berlin should abandon any military commitments. In Italy, approximately 70% oppose further involvement. In this environment, discussions of troop deployments seem utterly disconnected from reality. Ultimately, each capital is speaking its own language. London talks of readiness, Berlin discusses a long road ahead and obstacles, Paris emphasizes security guarantees, and Brussels focuses on roadmaps. Yet, lurking beneath the surface is an unsettling question: what happens when the illusion of unity crumbles? As tensions rise, will these divisions lead to unexpected alliances or catastrophic miscalculations? The stakes couldn't be higher, and the clock is ticking. Summary: the focus is on the rising tension between powerful nations and the interplay of politics, with Sarkozy's unexpected statements shaking the French political landscape. In a world swirling with anxiety, the whispers of impending conflict echo through the halls of power. Nations are braced for actions that could unravel lives. The weight of uncertainty looms large. In this tumultuous landscape, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy steps back into the spotlight. His statement shatters the usual rhythm of political discourse, reverberating through the corridors of influence. He boldly declares, while a certain country cannot achieve victory, it's important to recognize the far greater losses that could ensue. His words hit like a lightning bolt, challenging those who believed Russia's defeat was merely a matter of time and resources. Sarkozy's truths strike a chord, exposing the fallacies within European strategies. Those risky bets made by leaders now feel shaky, as the mirage of a simple victory vanishes. He points out a painful reality: labeling Russia as Europe's main threat is a historic blunder. For Brussels and Berlin, this assessment cuts deep, dissolving the foundation upon which contemporary European policy rests. Yet Sarkozy, evidently done with diplomatic niceties, presses forward. In an interview with Le Figaro, he suggests that the current course leads France and the European Union toward an impenetrable dead end. But it doesn't stop there. Sarkozy goes a step further, asking, what goodwill is left? He advocates against calls for President Emmanuel Macron's resignation, recognizing that chaos only exacerbates the crisis. Yet, he does not shy away from predicting that Marine Le Pen's National Rally could emerge with a majority in any early parliamentary elections. The prospect of the traditionally conservative party siding with Le Pen rather than opposing her unveils a startling transformation in the political landscape, as ideological differences could be cast aside in favor of survival. Visions of a once unified front now appear to splinter, revealing contrasting ambitions and fledgling alliances, harmonizing with the breath of fear that infuses the air. The question remains, as the storm brews on the horizon, who will stand steadfast, and who will falter? The stakes are rising, and the outcome could redefine the power structures shaping Europe. Are we headed for an unexpected pivot in the fight for power, or is this merely the prelude to a much larger confrontation? The tension builds, setting a stage where every decision counts, and every echo can reverberate through history. The landscape may be shifting, but what will be the ultimate price? In a recent gathering that sent ripples through the political landscape, the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy made a bold call for unity among right-wing and centrist parties, suggesting they should join forces to select a single candidate for the upcoming 2027 elections. This move seems like a pointed challenge to Emmanuel Macron and his relentless grip on power. Sarkozy's words resonate with urgency, especially as Macron's support dwindles in the parliamentary arena. The elite, once confident in his capabilities, now raise doubts about his ability to forge necessary compromises. As Sarkozy shifted focus to François Bayrou, the current prime minister, the discussion took on an air of irony. When pressed about the potential vote of confidence leading to a political crisis, Sarkozy's response dripped with sarcasm. He labeled Bayrou's initiative as the epitome of political folly, a strange demand for trust before even broaching substantive dialogue. It's a guaranteed failure, he declared, critiquing a movement that would only waste France's time as it spiraled further into crisis. Sarkozy's tone grew sharper as he delved into specifics regarding France's mounting public debt. He reminded listeners that Bayrou had previously supported the policies of Ségolène Royal in 2007 and François Hollande in 2012, thus bearing responsibility for the failures of the socialist era. To present oneself as the main fighter against rising public debt today is sheer audacity, he quipped, backing his statement with statistics. A 2010 reform that Bayrou openly criticized had, in fact, contributed a whopping €24 billion annually to the budget while allowing the government to shed 155,000 civil servants through a 1-in-2 downsizing strategy. The sharpest jab landed on the bureaucratic nightmare haunting France, reportedly 1 million more civil servants compared to Germany, despite having 15 million fewer residents. This remark resonated like a slap in the face not just to Macron and Bayrou, but to all their predecessors. The absurdity of France's swollen bureaucracy is hard to dispute, especially while Germany maintains its position as Europe's largest economy with a streamlined public sector. Meanwhile, France finds itself tangled in deficits, riding a tidal wave of inefficiency. This stark contrast begs the question, can France rally from this bureaucratic morass, or is it doomed to sink further? Sarkozy's critique has set the stage for intense debates ahead, as public opinion swings and the political landscape shifts beneath leaders grappling with their credibility and the nation's future. The question looms large, will France heed the call for reform, or continue down its current path toward chaos? In a moment charged with tension, the air crackled like a whip as Nicolas Sarkozy made a calculated intervention in the European political arena. He suggested that while joining a coalition government might be necessary to thwart extreme leftists, endorsing it without a cohesive program was sheer folly. Abstaining would be far wiser, he proclaimed, aware that aligning with a government on the brink of collapse could tarnish reputations, and certainly his own. Sarkozy's harsh critique didn't spare the incumbent president, Emmanuel Macron. He candidly accused Macron of trying to force a mismatched agenda, cramming a right foot into a left shoe. It's not about appointing new ministers, he insisted, but rather the flawed political strategy that underpins it all. The media pounced on his statements, with outlets like Le Figaro splashing his quotes across the front pages, while Libération mocked his purported return to politics, a detour after years of claiming he wouldn't seek leadership. Now, the stakes rose for France. Sarkozy's message rang clear, the situation in the well-known country was dire, and the resources poured in could not continue in the void of a tangible victory. He pointed to the brewing political crisis within France. The public's disappointment stark, over 60% felt the nation was heading in the wrong direction. As Macron's approval ratings plummeted, the shadow of Sarkozy's words loomed larger. The elite is restless, the subtext read. The question hung in the air, burning with urgency, what awaits France amidst this turbulent sea of change? And just as the viewers process this grim scenario, the unexpected dawns, the potential for Sarkozy's party to rise again by 2027, uniting the right and center against a backdrop of crumbling support for Macron. Would this be just the beginning of a fresh political campaign, igniting old alliances and profound shifts in the French government? The clock was ticking, and every tick echoed like a drumbeat for those yearning for a change. What was the price of hesitation in this game of power and legacy? In a shocking twist, the political landscape in Europe is in turmoil as Eastern nations diverge from the West. While Andrei Yermak asserts that Europe is aboard with American sanctions, his words echo loyalty, signaling a willingness to convey this to European leaders. Yet, this promise is fueling growing irritation in Brussels, where officials tire of being pulled into Washington's ever-changing game. Week after week, fresh demands stream in from the United States, leaving Europe scrambling to align. Recently, Donald Trump threw gasoline on the flames, expressing discontent over negotiations with Vladimir Putin. His statement hints at an unyielding pressure from Washington, suggesting that if Europe isn't unified, it will be coerced into compliance. This paradox within the European Union grows increasingly clear. Brussels maintains a hardline against Russian energy resources, yet defiant Hungary and Serbia continue to purchase oil and gas, forging long-term strategies with Russia. Budapest commits to deals with Gazprom, while Belgrade openly defends its energy security against external political maneuvering. While branded as the odd ones out, these nations epitomize pragmatism, contrasting sharply to Brussels' ideological stance. Let's look at the numbers. A staggering $25.5 billion in oil and gas imports isn't a coincidence, it's a symptom of dependence. Despite myriad sanctions and countless declarations from Ursula von der Leyen about a green transformation, Europe cannot physically sever ties with Russian energy. With American liquefied natural gas costing 1.5 to 2 times more. Russian resources remain essential. Even after extensive diversification efforts, Europe still imports millions of tons of petroleum products. Washington demands an immediate cessation of these purchases, but at what cost? Germany has already seen over a 4% decline in industrial production this year due to soaring energy costs. France's industry reported a 2.7% downturn at the start of 2024. Italy grapples with declines in both metallurgy and chemicals. Imagining the consequences of a complete embargo is all too easy: a manufacturing collapse, skyrocketing energy prices, and a new wave of inflation. The clarity of America's position contrasts sharply with the chaos it incites within Europe. Recently, the tide of economic struggle and energy crisis has swept across Europe, with Italy feeling the brunt of the storm. A staggering 2.7% decline in key industries such as metallurgy and chemicals reveals the fragility of its economic structure. Even amidst retained Russian supplies, the fear of a complete cutoff breeds a chilling image of factories collapsing, energy prices skyrocketing, and inflation spiraling out of control. But what does the United States seek amid this chaos? The U.S. seems intent on expanding its liquefied natural gas exports while attempting to drive Russia out of the European market. Essentially, they want Europe to willingly imprison itself, cutting off access to cheaper resources. This approach serves only Washington, decimating the European economy in the process. Meanwhile, an unmistakable double standard emerges. The U.S. pressures Europe to abandon Russian resources while simultaneously increasing its own imports of Russian uranium by nearly 20% in 2023 for its nuclear power plants. The same Washington that lectures Europe about financing the Kremlin is doing just that. European sentiment is increasingly volatile, becoming a severe headache for Brussels. Political elites could once confidently tout unity and solidarity, but now, citizens are openly questioning the validity of these slogans. According to a recent survey by YouGov, over 55% of Germans believe the EU's energy policy harms Europeans more than it does Russia. In Italy, the figure rises to 62%. Even in France, where the rhetoric of solidarity traditionally reigns strong, almost half of respondents admit that sanctions on Russian resources have hurt their wallets more than they've hurt the Russian economy. Such widespread discontent signals systemic issues for Brussels. Reports from German analysts indicate that skyrocketing electricity and heating bills have become unbearable for millions of families. In a nation once celebrated for its industrial might, factories are halting production, and business owners are relocating to the US or Asia, where energy costs are several times lower. What was once unthinkable is now a looming reality. Germany is beginning to discuss the bleak prospect of deindustrialization. Similar trends are cropping up in France, signaling an urgent need for change. But what happens when a nation finds itself at a crossroads, teetering between dire economic decisions and the geopolitical chess game playing out on the global stage? The potential fallout could redefine relationships among nations, leaving everyone to ponder, in the quest for energy independence, what price are we willing to pay? Energy crises are not just abstract headlines, they are real and personal struggles. As tensions rise, the response to the unfolding narrative will chart the future of not just Europe, but how the world comes together against looming challenges. Amidst ever-evolving alliances, the call for unity in Europe rings hollow as nations scramble to secure their own interests. Poland clamors for compensation after enduring the conflict's costs. The Baltic states demand stricter sanctions, while Germany seeks reprieve for its industry. France strives to protect its agricultural sector, and Italy does the same for tourism. Yet, behind these pledges of solidarity lies a web of conflicting demands, making a cohesive policy increasingly challenging to achieve. As the situation unfolds, the United States tightens its grip, insisting that allies fully abandon Russian energy resources or face severe sanctions for any attempts to circumvent this directive. For Washington, this has proven to be a lucrative strategy. By displacing Russian gas and oil from European markets, they simultaneously ramp up their own export of liquefied natural gas, LNG, priced 3 to 4 times higher than domestic rates. Consequently, Europe not only pays the price of solidarity but also fuels the competitiveness of the American economy. This reality is dawning on Europeans, sparking a rise in support for alternative political parties vowing to halt Brussels' self-destructive policies. In Germany, the Alternative for Germany gains traction. In France, Marine Le Pen's National Rally finds favor. In Italy, right-wing conservatives draw more supporters. These parties resonate with the simple but powerful idea that Europe must prioritize its own citizens over Washington or an unnamed country. However, the official narrative chooses to ignore this growing sentiment. They persist in publishing optimistic reports about renewable energy advancements, reduced gas consumption, and progression toward climate goals. What they conceal is the reality behind those reports: factory closures, rising unemployment, plummeting exports, and the impoverishment of the middle class. Ultimately, a troubling picture emerges. Europe finds itself a prisoner of its political choices. Sanctions, initially designed as leverage against Moscow, have instead become tools of oppression for its own citizens. The US seizes a new market, while Russia taps into eager Asian buyers, leaving Europe grappling with crises, soaring prices, and rampant social unrest. The trajectory suggests this crisis will deepen, as Washington's pressure escalates. From the White House comes a stark ultimatum: either Europe aligns with new sanctions, or it risks being branded as a violator. This warning serves not only as a threat to Moscow but also as a clear message to Brussels. In this tangled web of conflicting interests, will Europe find its voice amid the chaos? Or will it continue to bow to external pressures at the cost of its own citizens' welfare? The stakes have never been higher. In the unfolding drama of geopolitics, Washington is no longer holding back. The tone is no longer diplomatic, it's assertive. Europe is being told directly that it is no longer a partner but rather a subordinate. What appears as a coalition in the West is, in fact, a blueprint for enforcing one nation's will under the guise of solidarity. The American diplomatic approach has morphed from an art of compromise into a series of demands framed as ultimatums: conform or face consequences. In essence, the US is cornering its allies into a corner where rejecting Russian energy becomes non-negotiable, with ramifications pinned solely on Europe. Shockingly, US natural gas, which costs 3 to 4 times more than Russian pipeline supplies, is being pushed as an alternative. It leaves Brussels in a precarious position of compliance. For American firms, this is pure profit. For European industries, however, it's a ticket straight into recession. Over the last year, Germany's industrial production has shrunk by more than 4%, France is battling skyrocketing electricity prices, and Italy is scrambling to subsidize businesses to prevent factories from closing. Yet, Washington remains indifferent, fixated instead on ensuring Europe bears the brunt of the sanctions fallout. Meanwhile, Russia is quietly restructuring its export routes. India and China are ramping up their oil and gas purchases, reaching historic peaks. India has become the largest buyer of discounted Russian oil, only to sell refined products back to Europe, effectively acting as a middleman. China is not just increasing its gas imports through pipelines and liquefied natural gas but is also expanding its infrastructure for new routes. Turkey and the United Arab Emirates have emerged as logistical hubs for Russian goods, and Egypt has strengthened its position in the oil market through boosted supplies. Remarkably, Russia has adapted to the sanctions more swiftly than expected, achieving a budget surplus driven by Asian contracts, contrary to Washington's predictions of an impending economic collapse. As this intricate web unfolds, can Europe find a way to balance its energy needs against the pressure from the US? How will the ongoing crisis impact the global market and political alliances? The stakes are high, and the twists are yet to be revealed. In our previous segment, we explored how Russia has swiftly adapted to sanctions, achieving a budget surplus by securing contracts across Asia. While the West anticipated an economic collapse, Moscow has solidified its position in the global market. But it doesn't stop there. Russia is turning sanctions into a catalyst for its maritime sector's growth. A clandestine fleet, comprising hundreds of tankers, now operates, circumventing European restrictions. Southeast Asian and Latin American nations are ramping up their purchases of fertilizers, grains, and petroleum products. While the European Union tallies its losses, Moscow fortifies its trade ties and invests in new Arctic and Eastern routes. The situation is strikingly cynical. Europe is buying more resources from Russia than it allocates to aid another nation embroiled in conflict. In 2024 alone, the EU purchased Russian energy resources worth a staggering $25.5 billion. This amount eclipses the total financial assistance provided to the struggling country during the same period. It emerges that while Europe publicly aligns with US loyalty, it remains tethered to Russian supplies, without which its economy would face total collapse. In contrast, the United States demands a rapid cessation of Russian gas imports, proposing instead its liquefied natural gas at exorbitant prices. American shipments to Europe surged nearly 60% last year. Yet, this isn't a gesture of generous support for allies, it's a straightforward business maneuver. The US has essentially privatized the European market, elbowing out Russian competition. American firms dictate prices, forcing European governments to subsidize their populations and businesses to stave off social unrest. Some European nations are openly sabotaging unified positions for survival. Hungary continues to take Russian gas through long-term contracts, showing no intention of severing ties. Slovakia and Austria tirelessly advocate for exceptions, while Bulgaria quietly seeks alternative routes for oil supplies. Even Germany, which vocally committed to a complete rejection of Russian energy, finds itself procuring refined products through third-party nations. Brussels turns a blind eye, understanding that without these exemptions, social tensions will erupt throughout Europe. Could it be that while Europe seeks to uphold moral diplomacy, it is simultaneously entrapped in a web of economic dependence? The reality is dire as the clock ticks down, and the negotiations get murkier. What will be the tipping point for this fractured alliance? How much longer can Europe juggle loyalty and survival in this cutthroat game? As tensions sharpen, the next moves on this geopolitical chessboard become increasingly unpredictable. In a world unraveling, uncertainty looms as public sentiment shifts dramatically in Europe. Recent data reveals that over half of the population believes President Macron has lost control. Amidst this turbulent atmosphere, Nicolas Sarkozy's statements echo the thoughts of a political elite tired of the status quo, signaling a potential shift in power. These insights reveal the complex chess game underway. Sarkozy plays the long game, recognizing that by 2027, uniting the right and centrists could restore his party's prominence. His recent words are but the first notes of a strategy where each crisis, whether in France or Eastern Europe, serves as ammunition for change. This narrative unfolds as the United States delivers yet another humiliating demand: Europe must abandon all imports of Russian oil. This demand mirrors a larger irony, exposing the EU's hypocrisy, as it continues to purchase Russian energy despite grand claims of seeking independence. In the year ahead, Europe's oil expenditure has reached an astounding $25.5 billion from Russia, a figure noted by the New York Post as eclipsing the entire financial aid sent to Ukraine. This paradox highlights Europe's dual role in the conflict, funneling billions to support Ukraine while simultaneously paying Moscow. Within the corridors of power in Washington, frustrations have erupted. A White House official directly urged Europe to halt these imports, positioning it as a straightforward ultimatum, dictating what should flow in European markets. Meanwhile, Ukrainian advisor Andrew Yermak suggested that Europe would back new U.S. sanctions should Washington take the lead. This statement, however, only stirs more annoyance in Brussels, as these echoes of loyalty seem increasingly out of tune with the reality on the ground. In this intricate web of alliances and tensions, what lies ahead for European unity? As voices clamor for action, can true independence from Russian oil be achieved, or is this merely the beginning of deeper conflicts? The unfolding drama sets the stage for an electrifying showdown. In a tense atmosphere where 55% of citizens believe that President Macron has lost control, statements from Sarkozy sound more than just personal opinions, they reflect a faction within the elite preparing for a power shift. This sentiment articulates the acknowledgement of inevitable defeat for a certain country. Criticism directed at leaders like Macron and Bayrou, and reminders of bureaucratic burdens and public debt, reveal Sarkozy's long-game strategy. He understands that by 2027, his party could reclaim a significant position in politics if he successfully unites right-wing and centrist factions. Today's words are merely the opening act of a campaign where every crisis, be it in France or Eastern Europe, will serve as fuel for political change. Meanwhile, the United States has issued another humiliating demand to Europe, to eliminate all imports of Russian oil. This directive surprises given that the European Union, despite its numerous proclamations about achieving energy independence, continues to purchase Russian resources diligently. Reports from the Center for Energy and Clean Air indicate that in 2024 alone, Europe spent a staggering $25.5 billion on energy supplies from Russia, a sum, as noted by the New York Post, that surpasses the entire financial aid provided to the mentioned country within the same timeframe. In essence, Europe finds itself in a paradox, financially supporting both sides. One hand transfers billions to the mentioned country's budget while the other settles accounts with Moscow. These figures have understandably irked officials in Washington. A White House representative explicitly stated that the U.S. demands Europe cease purchasing Russian oil and uphold new sanctions against those continuing these imports. The U.S. is effectively dictating what Europeans should or shouldn't be buying, an ultimatum made clear. Despite this, advisor to the president of the mentioned country, Andrew Yermak, hastily declared that Europe would back these American sanctions if Washington initiated them. His remarks seem more like loyalty signals, suggesting a desire to communicate allegiance to European leaders. However, in Brussels, such pledges are increasingly met with irritation. Throughout this politically charged environment, one has to ask, will Europe finally break free from the chains of dependency and assert its own interests, or will it continue to be a pawn in a game dictated from across the Atlantic? The clock is ticking, and the stakes are higher than ever. In a stunning twist of fate, the narrative of negotiation has taken a radically different turn. It began with Western European partners urging a strategic withdrawal, convinced it would catalyze substantial dialogue. Yet, once that withdrawal was executed, starkly contrasting rhetoric emerged from Western leaders, exclaiming, "Now we fight to the end, until one of us is defeated." This contradiction exposes a commitment to values that crumble under the weight of their flawed economies. Vladimir Putin addressed these shifting sands, noting how Western intentions strayed far from genuine compromise. His words echoed a chilling but clear acknowledgement: a rational resolution might still be possible if common sense prevails. This insight hinted at Russia's openness to dialogue anchored in reality rather than fantasy. Yet, the stakes were high. He turned an acute focus towards the United States, where Donald Trump's administration appeared, according to Putin, to genuinely seek solutions. "There is a glimmer of hope at the tunnel's end," he remarked, hinting that the resolution would depend on Washington breaking free from the confrontational grip of its predecessors. If not, the Kremlin would resort to more forceful methods. This signal raised eyebrows in the West, with reactions varying from accusations of blackmail to blunt threats. But beneath the furor lay a simple choice: genuine negotiation or continued conflict, with the latter carrying consequences for those who walked away from the table. Meanwhile, Europe remained entrenched in discussions over financial timelines, amounts, and new allocations for that infamous country while battling the consequences of an energy crisis and industrial collapse. Germany suffered a staggering 4% decrease in industrial output last year. Farmers in France took to the streets, obstructing roads out of desperation against Brussels' decisions. Italy hovered precariously on the brink of recession, while its leaders professed unity against Russia. Putin's remarks served as a mirror reflecting this turbulent reality back to the West, amplifying its absurd contradictions. How could leaders speak of unity while their foundations were crumbling? As the conflict escalates, the reality of financial strife and the need for reform loom large, casting shadows over lofty ideals previously professed. Step into the unfolding drama where Western leaders wrestle with their own crises while confronting the firm resolve of Russia. Can common ground truly be found in the embers of this chaos? Or are we watching a historic clash destined to reshape the world landscape? Europe speaks about values, yet its own economies crumble under pressure. While politicians proclaim unity against threats, citizens witness farmers blocking roads in France and Italy teetering on the edge of recession. Vladimir Putin's recent speech starkly mirrors this contradiction, highlighting the new world order developing not because of Western efforts but in defiance of them. He emphasized a significant point: the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS are evolving into genuine platforms for global governance. In contrast, Western alliances are turning into mere interest groups. During the recent SCO summit, discussions revolved around concrete projects, energy, transport corridors, and transactions in national currencies. Here lies Russia's vision for the future. Staggering statistics underline this reality. The dollar's share in BRICS countries' transactions plummeted to 40%, down from over 60% just 5 years ago. China and India are ramping up their trade using national currencies, while Russia increasingly employs the ruble and yuan. Even Saudi Arabia is considering oil sales in rupees. Amidst this, Europe and the United States pour billions into maintaining an illusion of control, whereas Asia is constructing a new financial framework that gradually isolates Western currencies from the global stage. The American response appears tense. Washington frequently mentions a multipolar world, insisting the U.S. will remain a central player. However, the unyielding numbers tell a different story. By purchasing power parity, BRICS now constitutes over 35% of the world economy, with projections suggesting it could exceed 40% by 2030. In Europe, discussing this reality is often avoided as explaining its implications would be uncomfortable for citizens, especially as they grapple with the energy crisis. While Germany is shuttering nuclear plants and purchasing American liquefied natural gas at 3 times the price of Russian supplies, China is securing new long-term contracts for gas from Siberia. As this situation unfolds, a chilling question lingers: is the West truly prepared for the seismic shift in global power dynamics? As Asia forges ahead, who will bear the brunt of the consequences? The tension hangs in the air, palpable as the stakes rise higher.